if I had it to do over again, I would have made Minecraft. So
video game genres are a mess, and this owes a lot to the fact that, unlike other forums, games aren't just defined by their tones, moods, and themes, but also all of the different ideas that they bring together. This is why so many tags can be applied to a single title, and it's rare that just one descriptor will tell the player most of what they need to know about what a game is. And that's why Rogue is so interesting. Well, it's one of the reasons. This 1980 dungeon crawler was not the first, and it definitely wasn't the last of its kind, but its influence would become wide-reaching enough that those that took after it would be dubbed roguelikes, a term that persists today in a world where Doom clones eventually became first-person shooters. Rogue was originally programmed by Michael Toy and Glenn Wichman, two students at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And today I have the privilege of sitting down with Wichman to talk a little bit about the game's development and his history as a designer.
All right. Hi.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming on.
I was born in Michigan, yes.
So what was your exposure to computers growing up?
Pretty much none. There was, so my father was a college professor, and there was a computer at the college where he worked. And so like I saw it and played with punch cards when I was a kid. But I didn't ever actually interact with a computer until I got to college. So.
And that was at
UC Santa Cruz. So University of California, Santa Cruz. Yeah. So there wasn't really a group in that sense. There were four of us who should be considered the creators of Rogue. But all four of us have never been in the same room at the same time. It's not something the four of us created together, but it started with Michael and me, and it started with, we met at UC Santa Cruz. We were both freshmen in the fall of 1978. And I had ambitions to be a game designer, which meant like board games and tabletop games. I was, again, not familiar with computers growing up. I knew they existed, and I was kind of distantly fascinated by them, but I'd never seen one. And then when I got to college, there was a computer that, again, you didn't actually see. We had terminals, which coincidentally are the same ones that they're using in the Loki series on Disney Plus, those ADM3A terminals that people use. So that's what we had, and they connected to a PDP 1170 that was off in a basement somewhere, and nobody actually ever saw the computer unless you were in the IT department. And we had terminals, and it was a time-sharing system, and we used it to write papers and stuff like that. And I discovered that there was this computer, there were games on the computer. Specifically, there was Adventure, or Colossal Cave. I knew it as Adventure, and so I played that, and I was like, oh wow, I want to make games like this. And so I got a book on BASIC programming, BASIC the language, and started trying to create my own games, but I had no idea really how to program. And that was when Michael Toy wandered into the lab. Again, nobody had computers in their rooms or anything like that. There was a lab where there were, at that time, about 4 terminals set up. And he kind of watched what I was doing and said, "What are you working on?" And that was like our first interaction. And I told him, and then we basically started making adventure games for each other to play. So text adventures. So you would, type in commands and you would see the results and type in more commands and that kind of back and forth. And after quite a while of this, the thing that was no fun about it is that I could make games for him to play and he could make games for me to play, but it's no fun to play your own game because you're basically creating puzzles that you already know the answer to. And so like then the next year, but two things happened. One was we were talking about, can we make a game where the computer comes up with the puzzles for you to solve instead of having to do it by hand? And then the other was that these terminals were not built to do graphics. They didn't have the wireframe things like the Plato system had. It was purely text. But there was Bill Joy, who wrote an editor called VI, which I still use. And it had to run on a lot of different terminals. And so there was a library of routines that could basically place the cursor in specific places on the terminal so that you could scroll up and down on your text. So anyway, long story short, Ken Arnold, who was a student at UC Berkeley, took Bill Joy's code for VI and separated out just the library that did the cursor addressing routines, called that curses, and made it available. And then Michael got his hands on it and said, "Oh, with this we can draw pictures on the screen by using ASCII characters, to draw lines and dots."
What I find so impressive about making games back in the late 70s is that games barely existed at the time. Nowadays, there's countless books, an ocean of YouTube videos, and you can even take college courses on game design. So how do you even go about designing a game back then?
Yeah, that's a good question. We didn't have kind of like a language to use around game design. And we didn't really think about kind of game design as its own discipline. It was all kind of mixed together with programming, with software development. And so the people who are programming games, I guess, were thinking of, we thought of ourselves as software developers or programmers or engineers. And we just wanted to play stuff and had an idea about what we would create and how we would play it. And a lot of things just kind of worked themselves out in terms of game mechanics and balance and, how many levels do you have? How many monsters do you have? How hard should the game be? They weren't really kind of strategically thought through. They just, we just kind of hacked away at things until we liked what we saw.
So you guys were constantly playing it and testing it?
Yeah, we were. And there were about 20 people who just were people who hung out in the stat lab, which again is where the terminals were, when they should have been in class, and all playing it. And like, even before we had monsters, all we had was a dungeon you could walk around in, and people were playing that and really having a great time. So.
Is that the moment you knew that there was something like really compelling about what you'd made?
Yeah, I mean, that was, I don't know if there was a single moment, but that was certainly, that and moments like it where, we realized we had something pretty special here. So.
Did you think it was funny that there were games on the Play-Doh that could have been considered roguelikes?
Yeah, which I had never seen, by the way. I did not until years later know that there was this Play-Doh system that also had, games that would be considered roguelikes. I was completely unfamiliar with that, right? So that was just.
But you guys ended up getting the name.
Yeah, well, what's funny is that we ended up getting the name, right? That the genre got called roguelikes. Is I think that was not by anybody's design. It just sort of is. It was one of those things that came along that was kind of to our advantage. But we weren't basing it off of any other computer game, right? We were basing it off of Dungeons and Dragons, to the point where we had to make some very careful changes to the game when we decided to do a commercial version of it so that Gary Gygax didn't sue us.
I don't know if this is going back too far, but do you remember a game called Beneath Apple Manor?
I again, right. I never had an Apple II, right, and it was a time in life where, most people my age couldn't afford a computer, and if you could, then there was that one, and that's the only one that you knew anything about. So when reading books about roguelikes, I have seen Beneath Apple Manor mentioned as the first roguelike game. So I didn't know about it, I never saw it or played it, but I understand that it's very similar. In terms of having the core things that make a roguelike, which is, a whole other discussion.
This is something that a lot of people have debated over the years. What makes a roguelike a roguelike? And Glenn did an interview with Game Reactor just last year where he had some things to say on the idea of permadeath.
Well, because it's another thing like roguelike. I don't, I think there has been some research done on how the name roguelike came into being, but I don't know. I tried to find, anything I could find out about it. I don't know who came up with the term permadeath or how it became sort of, this term associated with roguelike games, or associated with this idea that, you can't just save your game and then go back and replay it from a save point. But we certainly, when we were creating the game, we didn't think of it as permadeath or anything like that, right? And again, as I mentioned in that interview, if you're going to have mystery items, then you need to have to live with the consequences, right? So it's really the equivalent of taking your hand off the chess piece when you're playing chess. It's a turn-based game, and once you've committed to your turn, then you have to live with the consequences of your turn, whether those are bad consequences or good consequences. And one of those consequences could be you dying, but that's not sort of singled out as a permanent consequence where all the rest are temporary, right? All of the consequences are, you can't go back and redo. So and again, that's the whole game doesn't work if you don't have that mechanic in there, because there's no reason to not just try everything, and then if it turned out to be a bad thing to do, you just go back and don't do it that way. So
you said yourself that a lot of the decisions were just things that ended up working out during development, and now afterwards people have taken that and kind of like dissected those decisions. Do you think that's strange at all?
No, I mean, I think for the most part, where the genre went after we kind of after it got into other people's hands, right, are like amazing, astonishing things. The things were taken so much farther than what we had envisioned. And so I think that the things that have been done with procedural generation and other of those concepts that we came up with, have been overall great things.
Going back to something you said earlier, you wanted to be a game designer, but specifically tabletop gaming.
Well, yeah, and I mean, really more even board games. So, like, I was creating board games as far back as I can remember, since I was old enough to draw. So, I don't know. I can't sort of point to, oh, this is the genesis of that. It's like, from as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to either make board games or make cartoons. Those were like, I wanted to have one of those jobs. So, and then I played lots of different kinds of games, like Avalon Hill games, like serious board games, because that's what the geeks in high school were playing, and I was a geek in high school, so that's what I played. And then, Dungeons and Dragons kind of took over life for quite some time. But yeah, once I started figuring out about computers, I kind of never really looked back. It's like, oh, the computer can do all of the bookkeeping stuff that's such a drag, and you can just focus on the strategy. And so once I figured out I could make computer games, then that's all I wanted to do.
So a lot of people would say that games by their nature have more limitations than pen and paper, but not really in your eyes?
Yeah. I mean, I agree that, like, in terms of doing role playing and stuff like that, right, that you can have a lot of freedom. And on that front, like for my group of friends that were all playing D&D, after a while, we completely stopped using books and rules and everything like that, and just basically treated it more like a never-ending story kind of thing, where one of us would set up a scenario and the rest of us would say what we would do in that scenario. And so if we were going to be creative, then I guess I'd put no constraints on it and we would just make up stories. But if you're going to have a game with rules and constraints and stuff like that, then yeah, I liked the capabilities that having the computer kind of handle the boring parts of dealing with a game gave you.
So then avoiding that bookkeeping is what gets you to like the fun part?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that is a way of thinking it. I mean, the other thing is that I loved writing code. That was the thing that I discovered. I mean, I didn't set out to be an engineer. I set out to make games, right? To be a game creator, whether you want to call that a designer or implementer or developer. And to do that, you had to write code, and then it turns out that writing code is an incredibly fun thing to do. So I guess that's the other part of it.
And you two bounced off of each other as coders, I understand?
And Michael had gotten his first computer in high school, and he'd built his own. So he was far ahead of me in terms of coding experience when we met. So, you know, from the point of view of coding at that point in our relationship, it was really much more that I was sort of apprenticed to him, you know, figuring out how to write code. But in terms of game design, we were bouncing ideas off of each other. But again, we didn't really make that distinction clearly at the time. It was more in retrospect that looking back at it, you know, a lot of what we were doing would now be considered game design, not coding. But it was all, you know, mixed together at the time.
Of course, I wanted to know if there were any funny stories from development.
Oh, yeah. See, that would have been a good thing to have asked me in advance so I could have some time to think about it. So I guess the answer is no, right? Because if there was, I would have it at my fingertips. You know, there were, I mean, it was all more than 40 years ago. So, you know, my memories of a lot of it are pretty vague. And there's kind of, you know, 3 different episodes of creating Rogue. There's what we did originally, where it was Michael and I in Santa Cruz, you know, when we were supposed to be in class. And then Michael left Santa Cruz. He went to Berkeley and where Ken Arnold was. And then Michael and Ken were writing Rogue, and I was in Santa Cruz, and I had my own version that was kind of orphaned there, where I did some work on it. So you know, so there was that initial one. Michael and I were roommates. We had the terminal in our apartment. We had a 300 baud modem with the mouse ears. We'd hook it up to the the computer on campus and work on the game. So that was one life. And then later on, Michael and John Lane decided to create a company to try to make a commercial version of Rogue. And so there was Michael and me, and then there was Michael and Ken, and then a couple years after that, there was Michael and John. And so Michael and John did the PC version, and were initially basically manufacturing and boxing and selling it themselves out of John's garage. And then Epix picked it up and, decided to distribute it. And at that point, they wanted a Macintosh version and an Atari ST version and an Amiga version. Well, initially it was just a Macintosh version. And and I wasn't involved in any of that, but I wanted to get back into it. And so for the Macintosh version, that was the first commercial version of Rogue that had actual graphics in it, right? Up until then, the PC version still used, I forget the name of the character set now. It's beyond ASCII. It had the smiley faces and the double lines that you could use to draw rooms and stuff like that, but it still was not actual graphics. So the Macintosh version, they needed actual pictures, and so I designed all the graphics for that. And and I was paid by being given the used Macintosh that I used to draw the graphics. I got to keep it. So that was my initial sort of reintroduction to the to Rogue after Michael and John had done the PC version, and then Epix decided to do versions for the Amiga and the Atari ST, which that's the Atari ST version behind me there. And I didn't do those graphics, but but they brought me back, or I came back and I wrote the code for the Atari ST version. So proof that I can write code.
You did the graphics for it, so where did you learn how to do art?
That's a good question. I mean, I actually did take art classes in college. You know, I took like drawing, and in high school and college took drawing classes. So, you know, and I had, like I said, been a cartoonist from a young age. So drawing simple, funny pictures is something that I had been able to do for a while. So, I guess that's the only answer there. I didn't take, you know, I mean, nobody taught any classes. I mean, there was not like Adobe Illustrator or anything like that. There was Mac Paint. All you could do was make pixels black or make them white. So there wasn't a whole lot of sort of technical skill involved. Well, if I had, I don't think there's anything let me think about that. Yes. I mean, I think, you know, the game that Rogue ended up being was very just hack and slash and kill everything you see, right? Which, you know, if I had it to do over again, I would have made Minecraft. So, you know, and I think that if we had kept working on Rogue, you know, and just kept it evolving with the times, I think that's kind of where it would have ended up, is something similar to that. But I always had in mind, I mean, what I really wanted to be able to do was make it so that the player really could just be dropped in a world and do whatever they wanted in that world. So, you know, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it ended up being too much about just killing monsters, or getting killed by monsters, you know, rather than other ways of using magic and using potions and all of those kinds of things. So, you know, I don't know exactly what I would have done differently, but I guess, you know, as the other kinds of games that I have worked on through the rest of my career have been a lot less violent. So
This is interesting because if you look at the genealogy, Minecraft was inspired by Dwarf Fortress, which itself was inspired by other ASCII games like Rogue.
yeah, it's my understanding that Notch played Rogue and liked Rogue, although I have not heard that directly. But you know, I think that there is a connection there. You know, it's sort of the direction things were building. There's a lot of different pieces that came there, but you know, in terms of a procedurally generated world that you can explore, right? That's definitely, Rogue was among the first examples of something that attempted that.
So, how do you feel seeing how far games have come and being able to be a part of that?
Yeah, well, you know, I'm proud of what we did. I think if we hadn't done it, you know, it still would have come about if somebody else had. It's, you know, it's astonishing all of the ways that technology has moved forward, exponentially, and all of the ways that it hasn't, that I kind of thought that it might. But so, I feel kind of, I'm not really proud, but I feel like I feel happy with the contribution we made. I feel like we made a significant contribution. I feel grateful that that contribution has not been just kind of lost to history. I think a lot of other people's contributions have. It's one of the reasons I agreed to be interviewed by you, is because of the things on your channel of, kind of highlighting, Mule specifically, some of the other things that happened early on. So I feel grateful that they're remembered, and I feel happy to have been part of something that I think has been a good thing. I feel like computers overall can make the world a better place. I feel that games overall can make the world a better place, and I'm happy to keep working on doing that.
Where did you think technology was going to go?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I might want to get back to you on that, because I know I have good things to say there, but now I'm drawing a bit of a blank. I really don't think I had a vision for just like how much faster computers would be and how much more memory that they would have. We had Rogue ran in 30K of RAM, and that seemed like a lot at the time. So the idea that just a regular person would have a computer with 4 gigabytes of RAM, I don't think I'd ever imagined that. I'm not sure there were 4 gigabytes of RAM on the planet when I started, so, the idea that you would like watch movies on your phone or things like that, I don't think I imagined any of that stuff.
It's like science fiction.
It really wasn't. If you look at the sort of hard sci-fi movies of the time, like 2001 or Star Trek, right? It never occurred to Star Trek that people could look at their communicators, right? They just talk to them. So.
So, final question. If he was his own boss and time and money were no worry, what kind of game would you make? The dream project.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think to be really honest, I don't think that I think I would. I like being a part of an enterprise. I have ideas, and occasionally I pitch ideas, but I don't necessarily want to, just take something and kind of pursue it on my own. I like being part of a team, and I like working with other people. So I've kind of I've at times in my life I've been kind of a visionary, and I certainly have visions for how I should do the product I'm working on, and occasionally I have ideas for games that I would like to pursue, but there isn't like a passion of, oh, as soon as I get the time, this is the game I'll work on. It's really more like every now and then I'll think, oh, this would be a fun idea for a game. If I had time, I would work on that. But the next day I might have a completely different idea. I will like I, games that I've seen where I feel like when I first saw 2048, I was like, oh, that is a beautiful game. I wish I had thought of that game, because every time it's your turn, you can do one of four things: up, down, left, right. That's it, right? So there's this simplicity to it, but there's this beauty and replayability to it. And, so if I could come up with something like that, just one of these simple little ideas that really grabs people, that's what I do. And then I do another one the next day and another one the day after that.
So it's more about the process then?
Yeah. And I really do like the process a lot. I mean, I have enjoyed my life creating games. I've enjoyed it a lot. And very few of them have really been my ideas. Occasionally, I have gotten to kind of be the central designer. But again, even then, that's misleading, right? Because games are not singular visions, almost never. They're always a collaborative medium. There's always inputs coming from everybody who's involved, and more so as the industry has matured, and you can have dedicated game designers and, dedicated animators, dedicated artists. Everybody's making their contribution, and the final product is never, you can never really say, oh, that's so-and-so's game, right? It's all of ours.
I think that's a good note to end on.
All right. Thanks.
I want to extend a very big thank you to Glenn for agreeing to come on to my very small YouTube channel. He was extremely nice and very excited and willing to do this interview, and it was super cool for me as well. I hope everyone watching enjoyed this, and I want to thank everyone also watching for all of the support that the channel has gotten in the last few weeks. It's been amazing. We are about to hit 500, I think, subscribers. 400. It's like one of those. I'm bad at the numbers. But thank you very much. And if you're interested in playing Rogue, you can find it real easily on My Abandonware, and you can play it in your browser if you don't feel like learning how to use DOSBox. And I believe it's also available on the App Store or Steam. You can find it easily. Go play it. It's a classic. It's still really fun to this day. Surprisingly, actually really fun if you assume that it's just boring because it's an old game, but it's actually still really good. It holds up really well. I don't have an outro. Bye.